Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Season 1, Episode 3 of The Last of Us. So, the first two episodes were like, yeah, like, you know what, this is a pretty good, zombie show. To then this episode where I'm like, man, like, this episode was amazing. Oh my gravy boat, Captain. It was like, man, this one, it was so simple but yet so effective. It was interesting in that way. So we go on to have like a little bit of like Joel kind of sprinkled into this episode, and then kind of Ellie and Joel are kind of in the beginning and the end. But most of this episode is to have both Frank and Bill's story. And easily, like, the best part about this episode was Bill going on and saying, it's like, well, this isn't an Arby's. Very, like Nick Offerman always has a very kind of just, like, a deadpan kind of delivery, and I love it. Like, the way that he just goes on and approaches things is to, like, be, like, man, he's so good. But also so is Murray Bartlett in this episode. Like, both of them together, these two actors just blew me away, as well as also I had seen an interview before I even watched this episode about Offerman and Bartlett kind of complimenting one another, and Nick was talking about like the White Lotus and how like that show is just kind of blowing up right now, and so yeah, so and how Nick had seen Murray from that, and so that's how like he kind of knew of his work. So with that said, what happens in this episode? So I'm gonna focus on the Bill and Frank stuff, and then we'll kind of get a little bit of the Joel and Ellie things also. So most of what Joel and Ellie do in this episode is just kind of scavenging for stuff, is to be the main focus. We're a little bit dealing with the aftermath of what happened in the last episode. If you don't know, spoilers, Tess did die. But hey, if you're watching the third episode, why didn't you go on and see the second one? It's very short. So in this episode, we have Bill, who is to be called a prepper. And this is to have been a man who planned for the end of the world and has a whole basement just filled the brim with guns and food and stuff that will last him. And then Bill goes on and goes to his local Home Depot and a number of other places for everything else. Because he becomes a town of one, until we then have Bill who meets up with Frank, and it seems that the two of them at first like aren't going to like live past this first day of them being together, but then we quickly find that these two characters are going to be spending the rest of their lives together, and I was like, oh wow, like that's really great. And so by this episode going on, and also to span between 2003 and 2023, so yeah, like these guys are together for a while, and we kind of have to quickly kind of fast forward through a number of different time periods. So with that said, this episode was amazing. It's great. If you haven't seen The Last of Us yet, what are you doing? If you have the non-ability to be able to say that you can see The Last of Us because you don't have HBO Max, check out an app that I've been using for a very long time called Zelifonic, Zelivonic. That's a way of which that you can go on to watch The Last of Us, or if you don't have HBO Max. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers. Here's the thing. I realize that probably not a ton of people are going to review this, because a lot of people will already know that this show is going to be a good show. or really it's going to have already been renewed for a second season, so people should probably watch it, right? Yeah, I think a lot of people like found out that this episode was going to get renewed. Because HBO was like, okay, great, we actually have something good to put out. Because I don't know how many times a lot of people just complain about everything, like this guy, quite often. I can't help it. Warner Brothers doesn't tend to have a lot of good things, or whatever HBO is really tied to. I don't know. But anyways, it is about that time to just go into that double five time territory. It is, of course, spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this episode. So let's go into it. So Joel and Ellie are just coming off Tess's death. Spoilers. So from the last one, or the last of that, us. Anyways, moving on. So Joel and Ellie, as they're talking, we have Ellie who's like, well, hey, like, having me with you, like, you were gonna go on and do this anyways. Like, you needed things, and I was to be your bargaining chip to get those. Like, you needed a car battery. You needed stuff. Like, having me with you was just, like, an added bonus. So, like, hey, don't look at me as, like, man, if she wouldn't have been here, then Tess would still be alive. The ways that things would have went the same way if Ellie wouldn't have been there or not. So like they kind of start talking about that and they just kind of like put that away, put that to bed. So the two of them make their way to this place that Joel would go on and kind of have this hiding place to kind of like stock up for things or just have this extra supply somewhere. So Joel and Ellie go to this location, and so Ellie's thinking it's like, well, hey, like maybe this place is completely empty, maybe there's something left, and so Joel is like, I don't think so. So Ellie starts looking around and is to see this cellar, and so she makes her way down into the cellar with this light on. We even have a point where Ellie is to ask Joel, it's like, well, hey, there isn't anything like bad in here, is there? And Joel's like, no, it's just you. And so Ellie's like, like you can tell jokes now. Oh, I get it. So Ellie goes down into this cellar and is to find like tampons down there, and she's like, yeah. So Ellie all of a sudden is to hear like the scraping of this zombie as we find that this zombie is smushed because I guess a like this basement had just caved in on this zombie, and so it was just kind of just stuck there. So Ellie goes on to cut the head of the zombie and then put a knife into its head, because if you guys don't remember, Ellie did have that knife. Ellie, throughout this whole entire episode, is asking Joel for a gun, but of course Joel is not going to give it to her because it's like, well, hey, like, I wouldn't want to go on and give a kid a gun anyways, simply because, like, if she has to go on and actually, like, shoot a person, like, that is to have, like, a lot of trauma for a kid, like, for a kid to deal with. And, like, I wouldn't want to, like, put that through, or I wouldn't want a person like that be, at a young age, like, put through a trauma like that of having to kill, unless it's a zombie, then it's completely fine because they're monsters anyways, but still. Because, especially with, within the last episode where Ellie is talking to Joel about, like, well, hey, like, don't you ever feel bad about killing them? Because, like, you do realize that they used to be humans. So, like, we're kind of curious, like, how Ellie is to kind of feel about that. So, as she is to stab into one right now. So, the two of them uh, go back into the room where Joel is after Joel's kind of like, Ellie? Like, where are you? So Ellie comes back and she's like, yeah, this place wasn't empty after all. So Joel has a gun that it seems like they're not going to go on and easily find ammo for this kind of gun. And so he just kind of stores it away in this kind of hiding spot. And Joel's like, or Ellie's like, well, you could just give me that gun. And Joel's like, no. So they leave, and so they continue to head down this direction. And so Joel doesn't like the road that they're heading to because she doesn't want Ellie to look at this certain area. And Ellie's like, well, like, you're definitely going to have me want to look at this now. Like, what is it? And so Joel takes Ellie down this path that is to have a bunch of skeletons and dead bodies all just in this certain area. Come to find out, the Fedra, when they were to start to run out of places for people to evacuate to find shelter, they would go on and take them in one area and just start shooting them. Hence, when you would see in the pilot episode that Joel and his daughter would have to get shot by the one Fedra guy because they just ran out of places to bring these people to safety, and so now this guy just takes their own life. Like, I would go on and just tell these people, hey, like, yeah, we're out of shelters, just go back home or fend for yourself. Like, really, in all honesty, you should give people the option. But I also get it. It's like they don't want to have to worry about there being a ton of infected just kind of around. So, like, I guess we just have to had to have had in this world just the lucky people that sought out shelter and were saved. So now we cue September 30th, 2003. So a woman is holding her baby, probably realizing she's going to be infected, or maybe the baby will. I don't know. Who knows? So something's going to happen. And so all these people are being hauled away on this truck, and we have one person and one person alone, who, of course, is not drinking the Kool-Aid and is not going to go off with these government people, and that, of course, is to be Bill. Bill goes on to hide in his basement and is to hope that these men aren't going to try and come for him. And so he's looking at his TV cameras, and he's kind of seeing that they're all leaving. So Bill then goes on and is to put this gas mask upon his face, and is to look around and realize that there's nobody there. And so he decides to take his gas mask off. So we immediately have Bill realize that he has free reign over this whole entire town. So Bill goes on and is to hook his truck up to this boat and is to immediately, like, get everything prepared for his generator. And so, like, he's stealing gasoline and fuel, and he's going to the Home Depot trying to get a bunch of barbed wire and kind of setting up for him to kind of fortify around his house to be able to make this, like, fencing area that he can go on and kind of put a combination into this door and be able to get into. So I thought, I was like, all right, like, this is really interesting. So Bill has been going on and doing this for a while now, like 4 years or something like that. 2007. Like, this guy has prepped like a mother trucker. And so we have Bill kind of looking through all of his cameras to then find out like certain infected are to make his way closer and closer to his place as a trap is to be set, and to have this zombie get shot in the head. And so Bill is telling us, yeah, never gets old. So we have Bill that stumbles upon a guy who falls into one of these holes, and that guy ends up being Frank. Frank goes on to mention that he was just on his way to Boston, and like he hasn't eaten for 2 days, and so we have Bill that goes on to tell Frank, it's like, well, hey, like, I know what you're gonna do. Like, I know that you're gonna go on, and after, like, you leave from here, you're probably gonna go on and tell other people. You're gonna tell other people about this place, and then everyone's gonna want a meal. And I'm gonna tell you, this isn't an Arby's. And so Frank goes on and convinces Bill. It's like, well, like I know that that you aren't an Arby's anyways because you don't give away free meals. And so Bill's like, oh yeah, you're right. So we have Frank who hasn't eaten in 2 days. Like Bill is like, well, I guess like I'll go on and I'll feed you. I'll do like the common decency thing, and then I'll kind of like set you on your ways. So Frank also finds out that like Bill has like a running shower, and so Frank goes in there, is going into the shower, and we have Bill that kind of gives him a new set of clothes, and so Frank is going on and asking Bill, it's like, well, hey, can I get 5 more minutes in the shower? This is amazing. This feels so great. And Bill's like, well, yeah, like, that's fine. So Frank gets out of the shower to then eat a meal with Bill. And they, of course, are eating rabbit that, of course, Bill had to go on and find and prepare for and whichever. So Frank is to also notice that they're having a certain wine with the rabbit, and Frank states that it's like, oh, like, so you're picking the perfect like wine with the perfect meal. And Bill's like, oh, okay, so like this is a man of good taste. So we have, of course, Frank consumed the whole meal, and Bill's like, well, there is more. And we have Frank who's like, oh, no, like I would love to, but oof, like I'm full. So we have, I feel at this moment where we're probably gonna have Frank leave, but Frank is like, you know what, like, before I go, like, I just have to go on and do just one thing, and then I'll leave. And so Frank goes on to realize that there's a piano there. And Frank goes on to ask Bill, it's like, you know how much this piano's worth? And Bill is like, well, it's worth nothing now. Because it's nothing, it's a piano. And so we have Frank that is looking at sheet music and is going through this book. It's like, oh my god, like I want to play this one song. And so we start to have Frank, who is on the piano, just starting to play this song. And Bill's like, could you just not, could it not be that one song? And Frank is like, oh, I'm sorry, like I'm not the best at this. And he's like, no, 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 like it's just the song. And so Frank steps away, but then all of a sudden Bill gets on the piano and he starts playing this song. And so Frank is like who is the girl? Like who did you play? Like who did you have that song for? And Bill was like, well, there never was any girl. And Frank is like, well, yeah, I figured that. And so they kiss, and it's like, all right, yeah, yeah. And so we come to find that like both Bill and Frank are just gonna end up together, as like we have Frank that tells Bill it's like, hey, go into the shower, and they end up in bed together, and we have Frank who is to possibly give Bill a little blowy, if you know what I'm saying. And we have Frank that tells Bill it's like, well, hey, like don't think that I go on and just kind of sleep with everybody after I have a meal. And so Bill's like, oh, okay, all right. So they go on and like what was supposed to be just like, okay, I'm probably just gonna leave at the end of the day. It's like, well, hey, maybe I'll stick around for a couple days, and then a couple days end up becoming like quite a few years. And so I was like, all right. So we have 3 years later in 2010. So now it feels like really Bill and Frank are like thinking of the bigger picture, that they want to go on and not only like better their house, but they also want to better buildings around them, which I thought was like, okay, like that technically makes sense. Because if you go on and you better certain buildings, like what's to say like this one building is going to always going to be the thing that you could like come back to if something happens? Like what happens if that building like quickly goes into flame, and then you're needing to adjust to another building or whichever, because anything could possibly happen. So Frank is talking to Bill, stating that he wants to go on and improve not only their house, but he also wants to go around and improve other buildings, even like the clothing store also. And Bill is like, what do you think that we're gonna get out of that? And Frank is like, no, I just really want to. And then Bill's like okay, like because Frank is just being very reasonable. He's like, all I need is like a coat of paint, and we're good. And so Bill is like, okay, that sounds reasonable. But also, Frank wants to go on and have Bill and him meet people as if they're as if they're just going on and like having like a play date or something, or a get together, some goofy thing like that. Because Frank had gone on to consistently talk to some woman on the radio, and Frank wants Bill in person to meet this woman and the guy she's with, that just so happens to be Tess and Joel. So it's like, all right, like this is great. So Tess, Frank, Bill, Joel all meet together, and they're all sharing wine. We of course have Frank, or we have Bill the whole time, who has a gun on everybody, and so we even have at one point where Joel is telling Bill, it's like, hey, put that gun away. Like I haven't shown you that I'm like being aggressive or anything. Like no, like so Tess and Frank are like really hitting it off. They leave, and so both Bill and Joel are just kind of coming up with small talk, and so Joel is asking Bill, it's like, oh, so like you're like a prepper, right? Like that's what they call you people, right? And Bill's like, yeah, something like that. And so like we have these people that are going on to have a really good rapport. So we then go on to 2013, 3 years later. So we have at some point where Frank and Bill are to get their place invaded, because Joel was to go on and tell them that, hey, like possibly at some point, like you should come up with these things here and there, these little trap things, because at some point, like somebody's gonna break in, somebody's gonna try and get in here, and you need to be prepared for that. So, uh, Bill, who is already technically prepared, is to be prepared even more so, as we find. So, as I'm already kind of forgetting what really happens in 2013. This, for the most part, the only thing that I remember is to really be the whole, like, while both Frank and Bill go on and they're supposedly, like, sleeping during the night, all of a sudden, like, some alarm goes off, and, and so Bill is already out there trying to defend his place with this sniper rifle, and Frank is like oblivious to what's going on. He like grabs this gun and is to go out there and is seeing Bill kind of defend their keep. As on the outside of this fence, there is a bunch of these kind of like flamethrower like things that are attacking all these men and killing them all. And Bill ends up getting shot in the process. Frank goes on to tell Bill, it's like, hey, we need to go back inside. And so Bill is telling Frank and like preparing him, like, okay, like just kind of keep the gas on. Like at some point they'll all die. And we of course have Bill who's telling Frank, it's like, well, hey, like how about you just kind of bring Joel up here, like, because Bill's assuming that he's going to die. And so we have Frank that is going on and trying to like nurse Bill's wound, trying to either pull the bullet out or trying to like put a bandage possibly over the wound. And so we assume that like Bill might die. Cue 10 years later, 2023, and we find out that somebody outside the house is to be in a wheelchair, and we immediately think it's Bill. Come to find out it's not Bill, it's actually Frank. Frank is to come into some condition, which of course is to have him like not have the use of his legs. And so we have Frank that is to tell Bill, it's like, hey, it's kind of getting cold outside. And Frank is like, okay, like, let's get in and let's warm you up. So we come to find that the two are to kind of eat a meal and everything like that. And so they end up getting tired. They go to bed. And so Bill wakes up and realizes that, like, Frank is in his wheelchair, and like he tried to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, but he ended up just getting so exhausted that like he couldn't make it. Like he just kind of probably maybe crapped himself, who knows. Maybe just peed himself, who knows. And so we have Bill who's like, man, all right. So we have Bill and we have Frank who's just kind of talking about Frank's condition. And we have Frank who's just like, well, hey, like, it's not like we have an MRI here and like we know what we're looking at. like we don't have that kind of luck. We're like we don't have a convenience of a doctor, and plus also like there is no cure for what Frank had in the normal world of things anyways. So there's nothing that they can do but have Frank really choose when he is just kind of had enough. And it feels that Frank has finally gotten to that point of he wants to just kind of live for one more day and live it with Bill. And so we have Frank that tells Bill that he wants to go on and have him fill up his bottle with drugs and go out that way, dying in Bill's arms, sleeping soundly. And so we have Bill with like tears in his eyes, who goes on and is to just start making this meal. And so they make the meal and they're having so much wine. And so in the last thing of wine, they go on and they pour the drugs into this glass. And so we have Frank who talks to Bill and is to state it's like, well, hey, like, were there drugs already in the wine beforehand? And we have Bill that says, like, yeah, enough to kill a horse. And so we come to find out that Bill also wants to go out with Frank because, like, it's just a romantic gesture, and Bill, like, realizes that the only thing that he needed in life was Frank, and that was it for him. And so Frank goes on and says, it's like, man, that is like incredibly romantic. So they go on, and so Frank is to have his last bit of drink, and so they go off to bed together, and they die in one another's arms. And so they had to kind of open up the window because they knew they were going to die and smell and whatever. So cue both Joel and Ellie making their way to where, of course, Bill and Frank were. Joel knew the combination to the gate, so it was kind of easy for him to just kind of get to this place. We also had come to find out, because Frank was talking to Tess on the radio, that Frank was the one to have come up with the songs being put on the radio, and Bill and Frank figured out a way to loop the songs on the radio. And so yeah, so like those, both Frank and Bill were the ones to have come up with the whole radio thing from the pilot episode. So that was the connection there that I forgot to mention because I kind of forgot about that moment. So Joel and Ellie go into this house and are to find a note there. And so Ellie starts to read it, and so it says to like whomever or maybe Joel. And so Ellie starts to read the note, and it's to talk about how like Joel is to be the only one who is to kind of figure out how to get around any one of Bill's traps, and there's a ha 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 kind of laugh there. So so Bill left Joel everything, like told him where everything was, and so Bill goes on and realizes like, okay, like I can take this car, and like now we can go off to Wyoming to go on and find Tommy, who is Joel's brother. So like they're going on and finally going into that mission. And so yeah, so really a really great way of how to wrap and finish this up. So with that said, I'm going to go on and just leave it at that because I think that's all that I really need to say. It only took 35 minutes. So, with that said, I'm just going to get the heck out here. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about this episode, how you are to feel about this season so far, if maybe you're not sure. If you're not sure right now about this season, what are you doing? Like, this show is so good. This episode was so great, and I know a lot of people might not feel that way, but hey, because a lot of people have difference of opinion and whatever. I think the clear consensus is a lot of people like this show. So if there's a naysayer that hates it, then because maybe they see in the game and the game is like makes this show more predictable or whatever, then it is what it is. But with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here because I'm going to just go on and uh, go on to review something else. So goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.